With this year's presidential election coming right around the corner, who do you think that you're going to vote for? Obviously, you're going to want some kind of mentally competent candidate who's going to step forward and fulfill all of his promises and fulfill his duties as, obviously, the President of the United States. The current one has refused to take a cognitive test during his yearly physical exam. I wonder why. 86% of Americans are starting to get kind of skeptical about this too, as we're going to see later. In addition to that, the Senate's quote-unquote border deal has finally been struck down, and for good reason. And on the topic of the border, the DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas has been impeached. All of that and more today. Welcome to Free Speech. Welcome to the show. For those of you who already know who I am, welcome back. For those of you who are entirely new to this show, this podcast, whatever, my name is Lela Cortez. I compete in speech and debate, and I love all things having to do with American politics, government, and especially the United States Constitution. With that established, I'm going to go ahead and get into our first segment for today, which is on, well, Joe Biden. I wonder why Brandon won't just take the cognitive test. Obviously, if he's as competent as his administration continues to claim that he is, passing this test should be a no-brainer, no pun intended. But that's the exact opposite of what we're seeing happening right now. According to an article from the Daily Wire in 2024, the White House suggested on Monday that President Joe Biden will not take a cognitive test during his physical exam, despite overwhelming skepticism from voters that he has the mental fitness needed to serve a second term. Overwhelming skepticism, even from Democrats. Democrats are starting to realize there's no way that they can win with Biden, yet they're still running him as their nominee. I honestly cannot even believe that this is how our system works in the United States of America, that it's a consideration whether or not our president can pass a cognitive test. It's ridiculous, but the comments and quotes from Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre really speak for themselves. She said, quote, "Biden proves every day how he operates, how he thinks by dealing with world leaders, by making really difficult decisions on behalf of the American people, whether it's domestic or national security. And so he shows it every day on how he thinks and how he operates," end quote. She said that that's how she's going to leave it. This claim is not entirely untrue. I mean, think about it. He does indeed show how he operates, how he thinks, and how he does things as the President of the United States. Who could forget when he summed up his country in one word? And that one word was so advanced that the majority of Americans couldn't even understand it. This man does indeed show how he operates and how he thinks. 86% of Americans just don't think that that's what we should have running our country. According to an article from ABC News in 2024, an overwhelming majority of Americans think Joe Biden is too old to serve another term, according to a new poll. According to the poll, 86% of Americans think that Biden is too old to serve another term as president. And technically, he's not even supposed to be here. Think about this. The whole thing with the cognitive test, it's a lose-lose. Either he takes the test and inevitably fails drastically, or he doesn't take the test, proving our point that he's not competent enough to pass. Either way, this party really loses on this subject. And you know what? Via the 25th Amendment, he's not supposed to be there. According to a Daily Wire article on Ron DeSantis suggested that the notion that Biden was too senile to stand trial for possession of classified documents while out of office means that he should not be viewed as competent enough to have the US's nuclear codes, and that the 25th Amendment should be used to remove him from office if he's really not mentally capable. For context, the 25th Amendment Section 3 says, "Whenever the President transmit to the President pro tempore of the state and the Speaker of the House of Representatives his written declaration that he is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office, and until he transmits them to a written declaration to the contrary, such powers and duties shall be discharged by the Vice President as acting President," end quote. Now, what do we take out of that? If the President is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office, he shall be removed and the Vice President shall take his place. Of course, we don't really want Kamala Harris being in charge of our country either. She's really not much better. It's like a choice between Dumb and Dumber. But here's the bright side. The founding fathers thought ahead and they were able to see that something like this could happen. And they gave us a framework for what to do if it does. Unfortunately, with the way that our current system works, we're not exactly adhering to these guidelines. But the fact that they're there just speaks to how amazing the founding of our nation really was. And just think about it. If we did have a system that functioned the way that it was supposed to constitutionally, we would get Biden out, check. And then Kamala Harris would have to fulfill the duties of president, which I don't think she's competent enough to do either. So via the 25th Amendment, we could get her out as well. Then we would have President Mike Johnson, which I do not think would be a disadvantage in any way, shape, or form. That's a dream of a better tomorrow. If we get someone else into office, which I think it's very, very likely that we will in this next election cycle, we might be able to return to a somewhat constitutionally functioning nation. But all of that is uncertain until November. So get out and vote. Speaking of massive issues plaguing our country, I know that I've talked about the border quite a bit over the last few weeks, but this is my favorite news topic right now, and so I'm going to talk about it again. Let's get up to speed on what the Senate's quote-unquote border deal actually entailed, and what happened when it actually reached the House vote. So let's get up to speed. According to a Reuters article in 2024, quote, the US Senate unveiled an $18 billion bipartisan border security bill that would also provide aid to Ukraine and Israel, but it promptly slammed into opposition from the House of Representatives. Speaker Mike Johnson declared it dead on arrival if it reaches his chamber. He said the bill is even worse than what we expected and won't come close to ending the border catastrophe the president has created, end quote. Now, what's so bad about this bill? Obviously, if they're going to be putting funding into our border, we're going to be solving this problem, right? No. And it turns out a very small percentage of this bill actually even goes towards the United States border. The Senate actually admits this, and I've got a piece of evidence from the Senate right here. I've got a chart on where the $118 billion are going. We can see from this chart that $2.4 billion are going to Red Sea conflicts, $4.8 billion are going to Indo-Pacific, $10 billion to Gaza, $14.1 billion to Israel, $60.1 billion to Ukraine, and only $20.2 to the US border. If we look at this, the majority of the funding in this bill is going towards Ukraine. The Senate trying to pass this as a US border policy is completely misleading. And obviously anyone who looks twice at it can see why we do not need to pass this bill. We don't even need to be involved in the Ukraine-Russia thing anyways. It was not our war until our president very foolishly decided to get us involved. But now that we're involved, they've been sending billions and billions of US dollars over to fund this war effort that we are getting nothing out of, mind you. And if this bill would have been passed, we would have given out another $60.1 billion. Thank God for Mike Johnson. So, there's a happy ending to this story for anyone who did their research and thinks logically. According to another Reuters article, by a vote of 49 to 50, largely along party lines, the Senate failed to approve a $118 billion bipartisan package that would supposedly tighten immigration laws, help Ukraine fight a Russia invasion, and bolster Israel in its war with Hamas. Maybe it would send money to Ukraine, and maybe it would send money to Israel and Hamas conflict. I don't deny that it would send money to that. But they're not in fact going to do anything about immigration laws. Under this bill, all that they're doing is designating funding. And because of the way that this administration has carried out their policies, or lack thereof, we know that nothing would actually get done. So, in the end, it's a good thing that this bill didn't get passed. We do need to do something about the border. Absolutely. I think that this is one of the biggest issues facing our nation in the last, at least in the last decade. I think this is one of the biggest issues and one of the things that Americans need to be the most concerned about. But passing a bill like this that gives the majority of its funding to a foreign war effort is not at all the way to do it. You know what? We don't even need to pass a bill. Joe Biden was trying to say, I think it was last week, he was trying to blame it on Congress that the border issue was as bad as it is, instead of just acknowledging the fact that he could do this with an executive order. There's no bipartisan bill that needs to be passed in order to fix our border. And there's definitely no need to send federal agents down to Texas to hinder their efforts in maintaining it. We need to do something about the border. This bill is not it. That's why I'm glad that it did not get passed. Thank you for watching this episode of Free Speech with Lela Cortez. If you liked what you heard and saw, make sure to hit that subscribe button and like this video. If you want to hear the audio version of the podcast, head on over to Spotify. It's just called Free Speech with Lela Cortez. Have a great day. Be blessed. See you soon.